Hey folks, here's our third learning objective for today, and this is where we start getting into the real academic portion of these things, where I need to clearly set up expectations for you guys when I'm giving you assignments and talking to you about expectations that I have. And this is going to start with verbs. I need you to understand what I mean when I write questions and prompts for writing. In a clear manner. So that's what we're going to start with, is just look at some of the most common verbs that I'm going to use in my questioning of you to kind of test your and assess your understanding of readings and of concepts and of skills. So here are the big ones. There's 7 different verbs that I'm going to go over that I'm going to use in sort of my academic language in the assignments that I give you. And remember, this is just for clarity. I want you to understand when I ask you to interpret something that you know what that means, or when I ask you to analyze something, you know what that means. So I'll go through a quick description of these 7 and then give you some examples and have a time for you to kind of practice with these a little bit in a place where there's no failure yet. Like, we're just learning these concepts and working with these terms. So the first one is really easy. I'm going to use determine or identify. So if I'm going to determine something or ask you to identify something, this can be one of the rare cases where you can give me a really, really short answer. All it means is to establish or state what I'm asking. So if I ask you to determine one of the main claims in the author's argument, like I have you read an article and you have to determine the main claim, this could be a 1-sentence answer, and that would be exactly what I'm looking for. So for example, the author thinks that cats are far superior to dogs, and she's right. That would be determining the author's main claim. The author, through their argument, argued for cats over dogs. Now, I just happen to be a cat person. Sorry to my dog people out there. They're fine too. So that one's the easiest of the verbs to do. All the other verbs are going to kind of push you into a lot more writing. And I'll show you some examples at the end. So the second verb kind of pair I'm going to use interchangeably is to explain or describe something. This means to elaborate or clarify or discuss at length. So I'll give you a couple of bad examples to highlight my point. So if I asked you to describe the mood of the poem and you just said, the moon is sad. Well, you didn't really explain what the mood was. If we go back, you identified what the mood was, but you didn't explain it. So I need some more depth there. I think about this in terms of, like, if you stayed out really late one night, you got home at like 2 or 3 in the morning, and your parents are like, you better explain where you've been. And if your explanation was, I was with friends, I don't know how your family works, but that definitely wouldn't have cut it with my parents. They needed to know details. They needed you to elaborate exactly where you were and what you were doing. Otherwise, you're going to be in big trouble whether you tell me or not. So an explanation is a longer description of something that I'm asking you about. And we're going to be working with how to lengthen our writing. Just know that I'm going to push you to really get into elaborate commentary. Next verb we're going to talk about is interpret. Interpret means to kind of infer, which means to put the pieces together or to translate something. If you think about interpreting a foreign language, you're taking that language and you're putting it in terms that you can understand. So I'm taking Spanish and translating it to English or German or French or Japanese or whatever. The nice thing about interpret is that it's a personal reaction. If I asked you to interpret a symbol, it means that you kind of get to take your own view so long as it has support. I couldn't just make something up and pretend that I'm interpreting it because I have to have my ideas grounded in the thing that I'm looking at. So for an example of a question I would ask is, interpret what the beach symbolizes in the poem. So you'd have to look at that poem as a whole and be like, I think the beach means this because this, this, and this for A, B, and C. So again, we have to add some support every time we interpret something. If I asked you to evaluate something, again, this is a personal reaction. It's your own judgment. If you are evaluated in school or in your work, I'm giving you a grade. I'm assessing you and telling you how you're doing. So if I ask you to evaluate something, you kind of get to say, okay, here's what I think this thing is worth. Is it effective? Is it not effective? Is it valuable to this poem or story or article that we're reading in English class? Um, to analyze means to break down or deconstruct. So if I ask you to analyze a piece of writing, that means you're going to take that thing and you're going to start breaking it apart. Okay, it's comprised of this piece and this piece and this piece and this piece, and here's how they fit together, and here's what that means. So if I take a thing like coffee, for example, if I were to analyze coffee, I'm a big coffee drinker. I might talk about what does it smell like. I might talk about its taste. I might talk about its origin or like the best temperature at which to drink it. So I'd really have to see those individual pieces and parts. Support, getting close to our last couple of verbs here. Got, I think, one more after this. Support means to cite, basically justify your ideas. It means that you have to offer up evidence. So maybe you interpret what something means, but you have to support that evidence, support being the verb, with examples from the real world or from the story, or add details or add data in order to back up what you think. You're going to find that in this class, like making a claim is great. That's a good first piece to understanding. But then to really show me that you're understanding something, you've got to back it up and show me, like, here are all the things that led me to come up with this idea. And then lastly, this one is kind of, I think, maybe the trickiest verb to get right if I ask you to summarize something, because basically it means to summarize, to shorten it, like get down to those main ideas, paraphrase what's really going on here. So it's an abbreviation of something, but it's an abbreviation with what I'm going to call nuance. So the skill here when we get to summarizing will be find the main ideas and make sure you're reporting on all of the main ideas, kind of cutting out all the non-essential things. So summaries may still be pretty in-depth if the thing that you're summarizing has a lot of important points. A bad summary would be if you just focus on one thing and ignore the rest of the evidence. That starts to be really problematic in life, where we just kind of pick and choose, like, ooh, I like this part, so I'm going to focus on it. But these other things, even though they're here, I'm not going to pay attention to. So again, we'll work on that more. So I wanted to go over some quick examples of like what good responses to some questions that you'll see in our first unit might look like. So a question that I might ask is, explain what the word seethes means and interpret how it helps characterize the wind in the poem. This is a poem that we're going to read here in the next week. So firstly, we probably have to look up what that word seethe means if we don't know, and give a thorough explanation of what it looks like. And then we have to interpret, so our interpretation with support about how that word helps emphasize or support or characterize what the wind is doing in this poem. And I know you haven't read the poem yet, but a good answer might be something like this. Seethe means to be filled with intense anger. Cool. So we're starting to get rid of that explanation. It helps show that the wind is strong and powerful, like it is filled with anger, and the gusts of winds are like it is letting its anger out, as if nature itself was seemingly mad at the town and the wrongness of hanging an innocent woman for no reason besides being scared and ignorant. There we go. We've got some good explanation and good interpretation of here's what the student thinks the poem means, and here's what they think this word in particular does to connect to the other pieces of the poem. So like, obviously this poem's about a hanging and about a town and about like sort of the natural windy reaction to this event. I'm not going to go through this whole next one, but I do really want you to pay attention to the way I write questions as well, the way anybody write questions. So I might give you one verb. I want you to analyze something, but I want you to analyze the framing, the perspective, and the blocking in a particular scene of a play. This is a play that we're going to look at called The Crucible. So one verb, it's like, okay, cool, I've only got one thing to do, but I have to analyze 3 different things. So I have to break these 3 things down into their requisite parts. So you can see this one question, this one prompt has led this student into a long, kind of lengthy explanation because that's what it takes for analysis. All right. Well, I've got a little activity for you guys to do with starting to work with some of these verbs, but I just wanted to give you a brief overview really quick of what they are and sort of the language that I'll be using in my sort of assessment, my questions for you guys. If you have questions, be sure to let me know. And don't feel overwhelmed with all of this right now. I don't expect you to be perfect at responding to all of these verbs. I will keep reminding you of like, here's what I'm actually looking for when I say and use this specific language. All right. Good luck, folks.